Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When I accidentally uncovered the truth about my sister's past, I wasn't prepared for the bombshell. It turns out she's not my sister at all. She's my biological mother. Now, she's begging me to keep her secret. But what happens when the rest of the family finds out? And what about my share of the inheritance? It all started with a rainy afternoon, the kind that makes you want to curl up with a blanket and a cup of tea. My sister Amanda and I were doing just that, surrounded by old family photo albums. Amanda had always been my rock, funny, supportive, and fiercely protective. Growing up, she felt more like a second mom than an older sister, and I trusted her with everything. We were flipping through the worn pages, laughing at embarrassing childhood haircuts and awkward family vacations. Then I turned to a page that stopped me in my tracks. The photo was of Amanda during her high school years. She was standing in front of our house, wearing a loose floral dress. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the unmistakable curve of her stomach. I grinned, pointing at the picture. "What's this, Amanda?" "The world's worst maternity dress." Amanda's reaction was immediate and jarring. Her face went pale, and she quickly reached over to snatch the photo away. "It's nothing," she said, her voice tight. The angle must have been weird or something. Her sudden defensiveness sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Amanda was never one to shy away from a good joke, even if it was at her own expense. For her to shut down so quickly was out of character. I pressed on, trying to lighten the mood. "Weird angle? Come on, Amanda. It looks like you swallowed a watermelon. What's the real story here?" But instead of laughing, she closed the album with a snap and stood up. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, avoiding my gaze. Her reaction left me stunned. Amanda and I had always been open with each other, sharing everything from crushes to career worries. For her to suddenly put up a wall was unsettling. The rest of the afternoon was awkward. Amanda changed the subject to something mundane, what we should order for dinner, and I went along with it, but the image of that photo stayed burned in my mind. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Amanda had been in high school when I was born, and I had always assumed our parents had raised us like any other family. But the photo and her reaction to it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was nothing, that Amanda was just being weird about an old photo. But deep down, I knew there was more to the story, and I was determined to find out what she wasn't telling me. The photo haunted me in ways I hadn't expected. I couldn't get it out of my head. The image of Amanda, noticeably pregnant, and the way she had reacted when I pointed it out. Amanda had always been so open with me, sharing stories from her teenage years that were equal parts cringeworthy and hilarious. But now, it was like a door had slammed shut, leaving me on the outside. At first, I tried to let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking. But Amanda's behavior only made it harder. Over the next few weeks, she seemed jumpy, almost paranoid. Whenever I brought up the photo or anything remotely related to her high school years, she would change the subject or dismiss it with a laugh. "Oh, that was just an awkward teenage phase," she'd say, waving it off like it was nothing. Her evasiveness only fueled my curiosity. I started paying closer attention, noticing the way her mood shifted whenever the conversation veered too close to her past. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of something unspoken, a tension she couldn't quite hide. Then came the argument that changed everything. It was over something stupid, whose turn it was to take out the trash or what to watch on TV. I don't even remember the details, but I remember the way it escalated, the way Amanda's calm facade cracked under the pressure. "You always think you know everything," she snapped, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "But you don't. You don't know everything about me. Okay, some things are better left in the past." Her words hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off. I stared at her, stunned into silence. Amanda was usually so composed, so in control. For her to lash out like that was completely out of character. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked like she regretted saying anything. "Nothing," she said quickly, turning away. I didn't mean it, but it was too late. Her outburst had cracked the veneer of normalcy she'd been so carefully maintaining, and I wasn't about to let it go. "Amanda," I pressed, stepping closer. "What aren't you telling me?" She shook her head, refusing to meet my eyes. "Just drop it, okay? It's not important." "It is to me," I said, my voice trembling. "If there's something I need to know, just tell me." But Amanda clammed up, retreating into herself in a way that made it clear she wasn't going to say anything more. Her words echoed in my mind long after the argument ended. You don't know everything about me. Some things are better left in the past. What could she possibly mean? What was she hiding? That night, as I lay awake replaying the conversation, I made a decision. If Amanda wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. The next day I started digging. I went through old photo albums, family documents, anything I could get my hands on that might give me a clue about Amanda's past. I even asked a few subtle questions to our parents, though they didn't seem to think anything was amiss. The more I looked, the more questions I uncovered. Why were there so few pictures of me as a baby? Why did Amanda seem to disappear for nearly a year around the time I was born? And why did none of the timelines quite add up? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I could feel the pieces of a puzzle starting to come together. And I had a sinking feeling that when I finally figured it out, my life would never be the same. The inconsistencies in our family history became impossible to ignore the more I looked into them. I started by sketching out a rough family tree, using everything I could remember about Amanda's high school years and the time around my birth. That's when I noticed the first glaring discrepancy. Amanda would have been a teenager when I was born. I dug deeper, trying to recall the stories I'd heard growing up. Amanda had always been described as a star student, someone who was involved in every club and always on the go. But there was a gap in her timeline, a period of about a year where she seemed to vanish from the narrative. It wasn't just the timeline that didn't add up. I started paying closer attention to the family photos and keepsakes stored in our parents' house. There were plenty of pictures of Amanda as a child and teenager, but there were surprisingly few of me as a baby. And the ones that did exist always seemed to feature our parents, not Amanda. The breakthrough came when I was rummaging through a box of old letters and documents in my mother's keepsake chest. Most of it was typical stuff: birthday cards, school certificates, faded photographs. But then I found an envelope that caught my eye. It was addressed to Amanda and written in my grandmother's neat, slanted handwriting. The date on the envelope was from the year I was born. My heart raced as I carefully unfolded the letter, the edges yellowed with age. The letter was brief but heartfelt, filled with advice and concern. My grandmother was pleading with Amanda to do what's best for the baby. My baby. The words hit me like a freight train. There was no denying the implication. This wasn't just some passing reference. It was a confirmation of the suspicion that had been growing in my mind ever since I found that photo. I didn't confront Amanda right away. I needed time to process what I'd just discovered, to let the reality of it sink in. If the letter was to be believed, and I had no reason to doubt it, Amanda wasn't just my sister. She was my biological mother. The thought was almost too big to grasp. Amanda, the person I had looked up to my entire life, wasn't who I thought she was. The foundation of my identity, the story I had been told about my own life, was a lie. When I finally did confront her, it was late at night. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I found something, I said, holding up the letter. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, and I saw the color drain from her face. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In Mom's keepsake box, I said. Amanda, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you my mother? For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. Finally, she nodded. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. I'm your mother. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to take back. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. I didn't know how, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was just a kid when I had you. Mom and Dad said it would be best if they raised you as theirs. They wanted to protect me. And you. I didn't know what else to do. Her explanation was raw, filled with guilt and regret, but it didn't make the revelation any easier to accept. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me free-falling into an entirely new reality. For hours, we sat there, talking through the details of a past I had never been told. Amanda explained how she had gotten pregnant as a teenager, how our parents had stepped in to shield her from the judgment of their small-town community, and how she had spent the past 2 decades living with the weight of her secret. By the time we finished, I was emotionally drained. I didn't know what to think or how to feel. The person I thought was my sister was my mother. My parents were my grandparents, and my entire life was built on a carefully constructed lie. I didn't know where to go from there, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The days following Amanda's revelation felt like living in a fog. My world, once so stable and predictable, had been turned on its head. Amanda wasn't just my sister. She was my biological mother. The parents I had always thought of as my own were, in reality, my grandparents. Everything I thought I knew about myself and my family was a lie. Amanda's confession replayed in my head on an endless loop, her tear-streaked face and trembling voice haunting me. "I'm your mother," she had said, the weight of decades of secrecy finally breaking her. I wanted to believe her intentions were good, that she had kept the truth from me to protect me, but the betrayal was too big to ignore. She came to me the next morning, her eyes red from crying. "Please," she said, sitting beside me on the couch. "You can't tell anyone. It doesn't change anything. You've always been my little sister, and I've always loved you that way. Can't we just keep things the way they are?" Her plea tore at me. On the one hand, I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation of someone who had carried this secret for far too long. On the other hand, how could she expect me to keep pretending? "Amanda," I said, my voice raw, "this changes everything. You're not just my sister. You're my mother. How am I supposed to move on from that?" "You don't have to move on," she insisted, grabbing my hand. "We can keep it between us. No one else needs to know." I shook my head, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was asking. "I've been living a lie my whole life," I said, pulling my hand away. "Don't I deserve to know the truth? Doesn't the rest of the family deserve to know?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "You don't understand," she said, her voice muffled. "If this gets out, it'll destroy everything. Mom and Dad, they did this for you, for me, for all of us. If you tell them you know, it'll break their hearts." Her words left me conflicted. I didn't want to hurt our parents or my grandparents, as I now had to think of them. They had raised me with love and care, giving me a stable and happy childhood. But the longer I sat with the secret, the heavier it became, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I started to notice things I hadn't before. How our parents were always a little stricter with Amanda, how they treated her with a mix of affection and exasperation that now made sense. It was as if the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for me to uncover it. The hardest part was reconciling my anger with my love for Amanda. She had been my hero growing up, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, who stayed up late with me to watch movies, who stood up for me when no one else did. Knowing she was my mother made those memories feel different, almost tainted by the lies she had kept from me. I tried to give myself time to process, but the secret began to eat away at me. Every time I saw our parents, I felt like I was hiding something monumental from them. Every time I looked at Amanda, I saw the weight of her guilt and the fear in her eyes. One night, I confronted her again. "Amanda, I can't do this," I said, pacing the living room. "I can't pretend like nothing's changed." "You have to," she said, her voice breaking. "If you tell them, it'll ruin everything we've built. Please, for me, for the family, just let it go." Her words only made the weight on my chest heavier. How could I let it go? How could I live with a secret that had already reshaped my entire understanding of who I was? "I need time," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need time." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Take all the time you need," she said. "Just please don't do anything you can't take back." I walked away that night feeling more alone than I ever had. The weight of the secret was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, no matter how painful, deserved to come out. But I also knew that doing so might tear my family apart, and that was a choice I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The days after Amanda's confession were a blur of confusion and turmoil. My mind swirled with questions that felt impossible to ignore. Who was my father? Did anyone else in the family know the truth? And why had Amanda kept this from me for so long? The revelation had shifted the foundation of my identity, leaving cracks I couldn't begin to patch up. I'd spent my entire life believing in one version of my family, only to find out it was a carefully constructed facade. But the biggest unanswered question lingered like a shadow. Who was the man responsible for my existence? One evening, as Amanda and I sat in uncomfortable silence, I decided to ask her directly. "Who's my father?" I blurted out, unable to hold the question in any longer. Her reaction was immediate. Her face tightened, and she looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "It doesn't matter," she said flatly. "Of course it matters," I pressed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "He's half the reason I exist. Don't I deserve to know who he is?" Amanda shook her head, her voice sharp. "He's not part of this family, and he never will be." End of discussion. Her evasiveness only fueled my curiosity. For someone who claimed to love me, who begged me to keep her secret, why was she so unwilling to give me this one piece of the puzzle? "Why are you protecting him?" I demanded. "Is he some horrible person? Did he do something to you?" "It's not about protecting him," Amanda snapped, her voice trembling. It's about protecting you. Knowing who he is won't change anything, and it won't make your life better. Her words left me seething. How could she decide what was best for me? How could she withhold something so fundamental about my own existence? When it became clear that Amanda wasn't going to tell me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started by combing through old family documents and photographs, hoping to find some mention of a man who might have been in Amanda's life during the time I was conceived. It was slow, painstaking work, and most of it led to dead ends. There were plenty of photos of Amanda with friends, school events, and family gatherings, but none that hinted at a romantic relationship or a potential father figure. Frustrated but undeterred, I expanded my search. I started reaching out to old family friends, carefully phrasing my questions so as not to arouse suspicion. "Hey, do you remember who Amanda used to hang out with in high school?" I'd ask casually, pretending to reminisce about the past. Most people didn't have much to offer. "Amanda was always so busy," one neighbor said. I don't remember her dating anyone seriously back then, but one conversation stood out. An old friend of Amanda's, a woman named Carol, hesitated when I asked about Amanda's high school years. "You know, there was this one guy she used to hang out with a lot," Carol said. "I think his name was Eric or something like that. But then she disappeared for a while, and I never saw him again." The name Eric was my first real lead, but it wasn't much to go on. I searched online, combing through social media profiles and public records, but nothing seemed to match. Frustrated, I wondered if I was chasing a ghost. Just when I was about to give up, I found an old yearbook buried in the back of a storage closet. Flipping through the pages, I searched for anything that might connect Amanda to someone named Eric. Near the back, I found a group photo from a school event, and there he was, Eric Thompson, standing next to Amanda with a wide grin. Seeing his face sent a jolt through me. Was this the man Amanda had been so determined to keep me from knowing? And if so, why? I stared at the picture for a long time, my mind racing with possibilities. If Eric was my father, why wasn't he part of my life? Was he even alive? Did he know I existed? The questions were endless, and the answers felt just out of reach. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to stop until I found out the truth. The next step would be reaching out to him, if I could find him. But even as I planned my next move, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. What if Amanda was right? What if uncovering the truth about my father only made things worse? I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. The weight of the unanswered questions was too much to bear. It didn't take long for word of my investigation to reach my parents. I had been careful at first, asking questions and digging into the past without raising suspicion. But the more determined I became, the harder it was to keep my search a secret. One evening, while I was at home, sifting through yearbooks and notes, my mom called me, her voice sharp and full of tension. "We need to talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I went over the next day, knowing full well what was coming. My mom and dad were waiting for me in the living room, their expressions grim. The air was thick with tension as I sat down, bracing myself. "Why are you dredging this up?" my mom began, her voice tight with anger. "Why are you digging into things that should stay in the past?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Why?" "Because I've been lied to my entire life. Don't I deserve to know the truth about who I am? We did what we thought was best for you and Amanda," my mom snapped. "We gave you a loving home, a stable upbringing. Isn't that enough?" "It's not enough when it's built on lies," I shot back. "You knew the truth, and you kept it from me. How is that fair?" My dad, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "It's not about fairness," he said quietly. "It's about protecting the family. We made sacrifices to give you the life you have now. Can't you see that? Protecting the families?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You mean protecting Amanda? Protecting her secret? What about protecting me? Don't I matter?" My mom sighed heavily, her frustration palpable. "You've always mattered. That's why we did what we did. But you digging this up now, it's not going to help anyone. It's just going to tear us apart." The confrontation left a deep rift in the family. For the first time in my life, I felt like an outsider in my own home. My parents weren't the unwavering pillars of support I had always believed them to be. They were complicit in the lie that had upended my sense of self. Amanda, too, turned against me. She stopped answering my calls, and when I tried to visit her, she wouldn't open the door. It was clear she felt betrayed by my refusal to keep her secret, and the bond we had shared for so long began to unravel. "Why are you doing this?" she had said the last time we spoke. "I told you the truth because I thought you'd understand. But all you've done is make everything worse." "I deserve to know who I am, Amanda," I replied, my voice breaking. "I can't live with this lie anymore. "You're not just hurting me," she said. "You're hurting Mom and Dad, too. Is that what you want?" Her words cut deep, but they didn't deter me. The weight of the secret was too much to bear, and the unanswered questions continued to haunt me. The fallout extended beyond my immediate family. Relatives started whispering about the tension, speculating about what had caused the sudden rift. I heard bits and pieces from cousins and family friends, but no one knew the full story. Not yet. Despite the growing isolation, I couldn't stop searching for answers. I tracked down old acquaintances, sifted through public records, and even considered hiring a private investigator. Each new lead brought me closer to the truth, but it also deepened the divide between me and the people I had once called family. The strain took a toll on me emotionally and physically. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, with no one to turn to for support. The people who should have been there for me, my parents, Amanda, had become obstacles in my quest for the truth. And yet, I couldn't stop. The truth felt like the only thing that could bring me any sense of closure, even if it came at the cost of my family. Months passed, but the tension in the family never eased. Conversations were strained, family gatherings were non-existent, and every interaction felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. I had tried to keep my distance, focusing on work and my own mental health, but the weight of the unresolved issues loomed over me. Then one evening, my parents called me over to the house. They had something important to discuss, and their tone suggested it wasn't something I could avoid. Reluctantly, I went, hoping it might be the start of some long-overdue accountability. Instead, they dropped a bombshell. "We've been thinking about the future," my dad began, his voice measured, "and we've decided to update our will." The announcement didn't surprise me. My parents were meticulous planners, and this seemed like something they would eventually get around to. But it was what came next that caught me off guard. "We're planning to split everything equally between you and Amanda," my mom added, her tone suggesting she thought this was perfectly reasonable. I froze, the words echoing in my mind. "Equally? After everything that's happened?" "Wait," I said, my voice laced with disbelief. "You're splitting the inheritance equally between us?" "Yes," my dad said simply. I stared at them, unable to comprehend their logic. "After everything that's happened, you're treating Amanda and me the same?" "She's your sister," my dad said, as if that explained everything. "No, she's not," I replied, my voice trembling. "She's my mother, and you've been lying to me my entire life." My dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've been over this," he said. "We did what we thought was best for everyone. You had a happy childhood, didn't you? Isn't that what matters?" "What matters is the truth," I shot back. "And the truth is, Amanda isn't my sister. She's my mother. You can't just ignore that." "We're not ignoring it," my mom said, her voice tight. "But we're trying to move forward. This decision is about fairness." "Fairness?" I repeated, incredulous. "How is this fair to me? You spent my entire life hiding the truth from me, and now you're giving Amanda the same share as me? How does that make sense?" "She's part of this family, just like you," my dad said firmly. "We're not going to punish her for something that happened decades ago." "I'm not asking you to punish her," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm asking you to acknowledge what she did and what you did. You lied to me. You made decisions about my life without ever giving me a choice. And now, you're acting like none of it matters." The conversation spiraled into a heated argument. My parents defended their decision, insisting it was about keeping the family together and ensuring that both Amanda and I were taken care of. But to me, it felt like yet another betrayal. "You're not just splitting the inheritance," I said. "You're erasing everything I've been through. You're pretending like Amanda and I are on equal footing when we're not. She's the one who lied to me. She's the one who put me in this position." "Let it go," my mom said, her voice pleading. "Please. This is tearing the family apart." "No," I said, shaking my head. "What's tearing the family apart is your refusal to take responsibility for what you've done." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. My parents looked at me with a mixture of frustration and sadness, but they didn't say anything more. I left the house that night feeling more isolated than ever. My parents' decision to split the inheritance equally wasn't just about money. It was about how they viewed the situation. To them, everything that had happened was water under the bridge, something to be smoothed over with equal shares and a veneer of fairness. But to me, it was a stark reminder of how little my feelings seemed to matter. They weren't interested in acknowledging the pain and betrayal I had experienced. They just wanted to move on, even if it meant sweeping the truth under the rug. I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Part of me wanted to fight for what I believed was right, to make them see how hurtful their decision was. But another part of me was so exhausted by the endless battles that I wondered if it was even worth it. The truth was out, but the scars it had left were deep. And no amount of inheritance could make up for the trust that had been broken. The tension in the family reached a boiling point not long after the inheritance announcement. I had tried to explain my feelings, to make my parents see how their decision felt like another betrayal. But it was like talking to a wall. They were resolute in their stance, insisting that their choices were fair, and that I was the one making things difficult. One evening, after another exhausting day of replaying the same arguments in my head, my dad called. His tone was colder than I'd ever heard it. "We need to talk," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I agreed reluctantly, knowing that nothing good could come from the conversation. When I arrived at their house, my dad was sitting at the dining room table, his expression grim. My mom sat beside him, silent but visibly tense. "Look," my dad began, cutting straight to the point. "This has gone on long enough. Your mother and I have made our decision about the inheritance, and we're not changing it." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'm not asking you to change your decision," I said. "I'm asking you to acknowledge how hurtful this is. You're treating Amanda and me like we're on equal footing, but we're not. She lied to me for my entire life, and you helped her. How can you expect me to just accept that?" "We did what we thought was best for everyone," my mom interjected, her voice trembling. "You keep saying that," I shot back, my voice rising. "But did you ever stop to think about what was best for me? You didn't give me a choice. You didn't even give me the truth. And now, you're punishing me for not being okay with it." My dad's expression hardened. "If you can't let this go, maybe we need to rethink your share of the inheritance," he said coldly. His words felt like a slap. I stared at him, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You're punishing me for wanting the truth?" I asked, my voice breaking. "No," he replied sharply. "You're punishing yourself. You're the one tearing this family apart. Amanda made a mistake, and we've all moved past it. Why can't you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Move past it?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think I can just move past finding out that my entire life has been a lie? That the people I trusted most kept the truth from me? How can you say that?" "This isn't about the past," he said firmly. "It's about the future. We're trying to hold this family together, but you're making that impossible." "I'm making it impossible?" I shot back. "No, you are. By refusing to acknowledge what you've done, by sweeping everything under the rug and pretending like it doesn't matter. You're the ones tearing this family apart, not me." The conversation devolved into a shouting match, with neither side willing to back down. My mom begged me to see reason, to stop pushing back, and let things go. But her pleas only made me feel more isolated. "You're asking me to give up everything I believe in," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "You're asking me to pretend like none of this matters, like I don't matter." "That's not what we're saying," my dad replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We're asking you to put the family first, to stop making this about you." "But it is about me," I shouted, unable to hold back anymore. "This is my life, my identity, my truth. And you spent my entire life keeping it from me. How can you expect me to just let that go?" There was a long, tense silence, broken only by the sound of my mom's quiet sobs. My dad's expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked more resolute than ever. "This is your choice," he said finally. "If you want to keep fighting us, that's on you. But don't expect us to keep bending over backward to accommodate you." I left the house that night feeling more alone than I ever had. The ultimatum my dad had given me wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about my place in the family. By refusing to let go of the past, I was being cast as the villain, the one responsible for tearing us apart. For days, I replayed the conversation in my head, second-guessing myself at every turn. Was I being unreasonable? Was I letting my anger cloud my judgment? Or was I simply standing up for what I believed was right? The truth was I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that the family I thought I could always count on felt like strangers. And as much as it hurt, I wasn't sure if that was something we could ever come back from. The choice my dad had given me was clear: fall in line or risk losing everything. But as much as I wanted to hold on to the family I had always known, I wasn't sure I could live with myself if I stayed silent. It didn't take long for the inheritance drama to ripple through the family. At first, it was contained to hushed conversations between my parents, Amanda, and me, but words soon spread like wildfire. Relatives who had previously been unaware of the tension were now fully invested, picking sides and offering opinions whether they were asked for or not. Some relatives were firmly in my corner. My Aunt Susan, who who had always been the family's voice of reason, was livid when she found out the truth. "You had every right to know," she said during a phone call. "This isn't about money. It's about respect. How could they keep something so important from you?" Others weren't so sympathetic. My cousin Laura, who had always been close to Amanda, accused me of being selfish. "Why are you stirring up all this drama?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Your parents gave you a great life. You should be grateful, not digging up the past." Holidays became unbearable. Thanksgiving, which was usually a loud, chaotic affair filled with laughter and too much food, was suddenly stifled by tension. The whispers started the moment I walked into the room. "Why can't they just move on?" I overheard someone say, their voice dripping with judgment. "It's a shame," another relative added. "Families are supposed to stick together, not fall apart over something like this." Amanda avoided me entirely, sticking to the other side of the room and chatting with relatives who had clearly taken her side. Our parents tried to play peacemakers, but their attempts to gloss over the situation only made things worse. Every fake smile, every forced laugh, was a reminder of how fractured we had become. By Christmas, I couldn't do it anymore. The thought of enduring another holiday, filled with whispered judgments and awkward silences, was too much to bear. I made excuses, saying I had work obligations, but the truth was I couldn't face the emotional toll. The hardest part of it all was losing Amanda. Despite everything, I still loved her. She had been my closest confidant, the person I looked up to for most of my life. Even after learning the truth about her, I wanted to believe we could find a way back to the bond we once shared. But the weight of her secret, and her refusal to truly acknowledge how much it had hurt me, had shattered the foundation of our relationship. Every time I tried to reach out to find some common ground, it ended in frustration. "You don't understand what it was like for me," she said during one particularly heated conversation. "I was a kid, scared and alone. I didn't have a choice. And what about me?" I countered, my voice trembling. "Did I have a choice? You decided what my life was going to be without ever giving me a say. How is that fair?" Her silence said everything. She couldn't or wouldn't see things from my perspective. The more I tried to rebuild our relationship, the clearer it became that the damage was too deep. Amanda was still stuck in the past, clinging to the version of our family that existed before the truth came out. I, on the other hand, couldn't ignore the cracks that had been exposed. As much as it hurt to let go, I started to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. The bond one had shared with Amanda, the trust one had placed in her, was gone. And no matter how much I wanted to believe we could find a way back to each other, the weight of her betrayal made it impossible. Holidays came and went, and I stayed away, choosing solitude over the emotional minefield of family gatherings. I missed the laughter, the traditions, the sense of belonging I once felt. But I knew that staying away was the only way to protect myself. The fallout had left scars that wouldn't heal easily. My family was divided, my relationship with Amanda was in tatters, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. Yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to regret my search for the truth. The cost had been high, but the alternative, living in ignorance, was something I could no longer accept. It happened on a quiet evening, months after the fallout had left my family fractured. I was at home, sorting through mail and trying to focus on anything but the gnawing ache of isolation, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Amanda standing there, her face pale and her eyes rimmed with red. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside and stood in the middle of my living room, wringing her hands nervously. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't stand the way things are between us." I sat down on the couch, gesturing for her to do the same. She hesitated for a moment before sinking into the seat across from me, her shoulders slumping as if under the weight of the world. "I know I've made mistakes," she began. "I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I can't lose you. You're my daughter, my sister, my everything. And I'm begging you, please let this go." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I could see the pain etched on her face, the genuine fear of losing me forever. But her plea only reignited the anger and frustration I'd been trying to suppress. "This isn't about me holding on to the past, Amanda," I said, my voice trembling. "This is about the truth. About who I am, about who we are. You can't keep asking me to bury this, to pretend like it doesn't matter." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not that simple," she said. "If the rest of the family finds out, it'll destroy everything. Mom and Dad," she paused, correcting herself. "Grandma and Grandpa, They'll never forgive me. Please, if you love me, you'll let this go. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. Amanda, I said, meeting her gaze, I do love you. I've loved you my whole life, but I can't carry this burden for you anymore. You made this decision decades ago, and now I'm the one paying the price. That's not fair to me. She flinched at my words, but didn't interrupt. I deserve to live my life with the truth, I continued. Not the version of it you've constructed to protect yourself. You asked me to keep this secret because you're afraid of what will happen if it gets out. But did you ever stop to think about what it's done to me? About how it feels to find out my entire life has been a lie? Amanda broke down, her sobs filling the room. For a moment, I considered reaching out to comfort her, but I stopped myself. This wasn't something I could fix for her. She had to confront the consequences of her choices, just as I had been forced to confront the truth about my own life. When she finally looked up at me, her face was a mixture of sorrow and resignation. I don't know how to fix this, she said quietly. Maybe you can't, I said, my voice softening. But we can't keep pretending like it didn't happen. The truth is out now, and we have to figure out how to live with it. For me, that means setting boundaries, even if it hurts. She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure if they were true. But I can't be the person you turn to for forgiveness without accountability. I need time, Amanda. I need space. Amanda left that night, and I knew it might be the last time we truly spoke. Walking away from her, walking away from my family, felt like tearing out a piece of my heart. But I also knew it was the only way to find peace. I haven't spoken to Amanda or my parents since. The silence is painful, but it's also freeing. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Some secrets are too heavy to keep, even for family. The truth may have shattered the foundation of my relationships, but it also gave me the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. And as hard as it was to walk away, I know in my heart that it was the right thing to do.